Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for August 2017. I'm Adam Koralik, and I'm here to do a podcast as per usual. So basically the way this works is I just have a list of subjects, some of which are presented by just me, some of which are presented by Patreon backers, and yeah, we just go ahead and I just talk about them for a little while. We chat, chill, hang out, all that fun stuff. And let's just start off with it. So the first thing I just want to talk about is really just what's going on. How are you guys doing? Leave comments down below. Let me know like what you've been doing for the last month or so. But with me, I've been very busy. I was in Europe for a couple of weeks. I hopped around a few different countries. I was in Germany. I was in Poland. I was in the Czech Republic, Austria, and Hungary. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. Didn't do much in the way of video games, but I got a couple of games that I showed in the most recent playload at the time I released this. So you could check that out if you want to see that. But there won't be any like store tour videos or anything this time around because, contrary to popular belief, I don't go to places to check out video game stores. It's just something I get to do if I'm already there. If that makes sense. So it's but overall had a lot of fun. It was really very very cool. And now we're coming up to event and convention season, which means I spend a lot of this time of the year on planes going all over the damn place because I'm invited to conventions or events or whatever for one reason or another. So just to give you a small sample of what I'm talking about. So I'm recording this on August 2nd. Tomorrow, August 3rd, I fly to Denver. I'll be there for a couple of days. Then I fly to Madison, Wisconsin. Then I'm there for a couple of days. I get to go home for a night in which my intention, we'll see if I was successful in this, is to do a live show on August 10th. And then the next morning I fly to St. Louis. I'm there for a couple of days. I fly back. I'm back on the 13th. Then I'm in Chicago for like 2 days. Then I fly off to San Francisco for like 3 days. Then I come back, and then I'm here for like a week, and then I go off to Seattle. I'll be at PAX Prime, and I'll be there from like August 31st to September 5th. Then I get back from that, and I'm in Chicago for like 2 days. And then I go off to Newark, New Jersey, for a convention for a couple days, and that's just what I know right now. Like, you know, stuff just pops up all the time, so I have no idea what's going to go on. So, yeah, I spend a lot of time on planes. It's what happens around convention and event season is just, as long as you're lucky, and I get lucky with this kind of stuff, you know, I'll just be able to get to go to all these things because people will come to me and they're like, hey, do you want to come to our thing? Here's your flight and information and all that stuff. And it's like, all right, I guess I'm going. So, yeah, it keeps me very, very busy. Yeah, it's definitely fun. So, I believe I announced most of those in a video saying, like, if you want to come out and meet me at stuff, you could do that. The newest one that was added was PAX West in Seattle. I didn't know I was going to be going to that, but now I am. So if you happen to be there, in fact, the time that this is publicly released, this podcast, PAX West will only be a couple days away. So if you're in the Seattle area and you want to meet me, come on out. I will be wandering around. I'm not like a guest of the convention, but let's just say an angel investor hooked me up with my time there. And so if you want to come meet me, just come on out. I'm sure I'll be wandering around somewhere. So just come up, say hello, all that fun stuff. Yeah, but Seattle, man, that's a great fucking place. It really is. Like, if you're into retro gaming, both Microsoft and Nintendo of America are based there. So there's a lot of retro game stuff in that area. It's just like, it's the closest thing to like Japan, I guess you could say, in the US as far as game hunting goes. It's just the concentration of game stores everywhere is insane. So it's really very cool. How much of that I'll actually get to do this time around, I don't know, but I'll do what I can. I'll see what I can do. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun. So highly recommended to go to that. I've been to PAX West a couple of times, but not in the last year or so. So it'll be fun to go back. But yeah, so that's kind of the upcoming events and convention schedule. Like I said, I'm also going to be at the Missouri Game Con, or by the time this is public, I will have already gone. I'm going to AVGC in New Jersey, as mentioned before, so you can come out to that if you want. It's always cool to meet people and stuff, so if you are a fan of the channel in any way, shape, or form and you want to meet me, that's some of the places I'll be. Upcoming will be St. Louis. At least for fan meetup purposes, I can meet you in St. Louis, Seattle, or Parsippany, New Jersey. While I will be in Denver and I will be in Madison and I will be in San Francisco, I don't really have the opportunity to meet up with people for those particular times. But the other ones, yeah. While I was in Europe, I did arrange a fan meetup in Berlin, Germany. That was kind of cool. A few people came out. That was really nice. I talked more about that in my playload video, which you can check out. You can even see footage of stuff there if you want. But yeah, let's just move on. Let's go on with the first real subject here, which is this is brought to you by a Patreon backer named Kyle Vaughn. Every month he supports me, and he gets to pick a subject as a result of that. Generally, what Kyle does is he'll just kind of let me pick whatever I want, which was the exact same case with this. But he and I were, while he said that, he and I were in mid-conversation about a specific subject, and I thought, you know what, this would actually make a good podcast subject, so I'm just going with that. So he did, and he didn't pick this at the same time. So this, basically the subject is import games and region coding. So basically what had happened here was I had, like I said, I had gone to Europe and I had picked up a few games, and one of them in particular was the Xbox 360 game called Iron Sky Invasion. It's a region-coded game, which is really very annoying. While the PS3 version of the same game is not region-coded, because with the exception of, I think, Persona 4, there are no region-coded games on the PS3. Whereas the 360 was kind of a crapshoot. Like, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And it's very annoying because you put the game into the console and it will show the name of the game and it'll show the little preview of it. It'll ask you if you want to start playing it, all that stuff, like totally normal. And then it just stops as soon as you try to actually play it. A little error message comes up saying you can't do that. Just some little dumb line of code in there that's just designed to piss you off. And, you know, he's kind of the same philosophy, which is like, I hate region coding. And I just kind of wanted to talk about region coding in general. And it's very nice now. Like, if you don't know your history on this, region coding was basically created as a way to kind of police games from being able to leak from one region or to another, usually for cultural or financial differences, meaning there might be versions of games that come out in one country that would be considered insensitive in other countries, but at the same time a game might get released, like say in Japan, like a full year before it comes out, localized with, you know, a full English language or something in North America. And so having region coding, the argument is essentially that helps them be able to get the most bites out of the apple, which I never really liked that argument because you're still selling the game. It's just that, I don't know, maybe one could make the argument that it's really a guy on eBay who's selling the game, but either way, a copy of it is sold at one point. So I can also kind of see that cultural argument, but I don't exactly respect that argument because I think that we're not children. Well, for the most part, I don't really need a company to tell me what I can and can't play. So I'm not a fan of region coding. It's really a hard concept to talk about without an inherent bias against it, because it's really hard to make a good argument for region coding. I can see why I think they thought it was a good idea, but I simply dispute and disagree with it, you know? So that said, we were talking about like options for stuff to work around. So he whenever it comes to imports, he really wanted a lot more PS3 versions of titles. He actually owns like a PS2 dev kit that is region free, which is awesome. I didn't even know that was a thing. So he's got spoiled by that. PS2 is one of the least import-friendly consoles ever. Like, you have to either modify it or treat it like you would a burned game to get an import game to run, or just buy, you know, one of each region of the console, which is kind of a hassle. So he's got that PS2 dev kit. PS3 obviously doesn't have that problem. Xbox One and PS4 don't have that problem. Switch doesn't have that problem. We didn't really talk about the Wii U, but even though that one could, of course, use that one's region locked as well. But mostly we were talking about the Xbox 360 for the reasons stated earlier. That game I got, you know, he was like, I want that game, but I have to get the PS3 version because the Xbox 360 version is locked. So he was actually talking about the idea that, you know, maybe you should get basically a modified Xbox 360 that would allow it to play all three regions of games. And I gotta say, like, that's not the worst idea. Like, I've never done that, at least with the 360, but I do like the idea because there's a lot of games only released in Europe and especially in Japan for the 360 that North America never saw, and a lot of them are unfortunately region locked. Now, before I dive into that a little bit, I will say that, you know, some of the silver lining to the whole region coding thing is I keep hoping that Microsoft updates the 360 towards the end of its lifespan, which is pretty much there. to give just basically drop the region locks, though I have no reason to think they'll actually do that. I wish they would. The other thing they're kind of giving us as a little gift is if a game was regionally exclusive but is also made backwards compatible on the Xbox One, then that game will work on your Xbox One. So for example, Iron Sky Invasion, which I have, is region locked, as mentioned before. It will not work on my North American 360. However, if the game is ever made backwards compatible on the Xbox One, it will work on my North American Xbox One. That said, the game is not compatible, and it's kind of unlikely that that particular one would become compatible. And it's also very unlikely that Microsoft will ever complete the Xbox backwards compatibility project. And on top of that, that project is kind of hollow because it's very short-lived. The backwards compatible titles require internet access in order to function. I don't know why they do, but you can't play. They're basically DRM locks. Like, you can't unplug your Xbox One from the internet and then run those 360 backwards compatible titles. They don't work, which is very, very annoying. So that's not a long-term solution. So the long-term solution is potentially a modified console, which is what he's looking into right now. Now, my buddy, I have a buddy of mine who's going to probably hook him up with one of those, and that's really awesome. And he was telling me about how great that thing is and how well it works and all that stuff. And so maybe I'll get one myself because I like the idea too. And here's why I like it the most. See, until I went to Japan, I was never that interested in 360 imports, mostly because of region coding. But I also didn't think there were that many worthwhile titles because generally a lot of the imports that I was exposed to in Europe are mostly sports titles and they're not really worth getting. And in Japan, we're always persistently told, the Xbox 360 was a complete bomb. Everyone hates Xbox in Japan, blah, 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 blah. As it turns out, the Xbox 360 in particular is not the failure that we perceive it to be in Japan in the West. In the West, we always just assume Xbox stuff fails. And there's a reason we think that, because none of us go there. And when we just see sales numbers, we're like, oh yeah, it's selling very poorly. It must be really hated. Well, here's the way to rephrase that. As it turns out, yes, Xbox stuff does not sell particularly well in Japan because of a multitude of reasons. But essentially that just means it never succeeds with the mainstream audience. As it turns out, the Xbox 360 in particular did very well amongst what you might call hardcore gamers. Like, there were very passionate gamers in Japan. The Xbox 360 was their console of choice. And because of that, there's actually a shit ton of Japanese Xbox 360 exclusives. Like, the amount of games that were released over there that we never got is pretty high. I don't remember the term for it, but while I was there, I was told that there's a term for a type of console in a generation that usually has something to do with the anime fan game console. Is essentially what it translates to. The Sega Saturn was that in Japan, and the Sega Saturn had something like 1,100 exclusives released that North America and Europe never saw. But as it turns out, the 360 was the same deal for Japan. It was the anime hardcore gamers console, so that meant there's a lot of game content that the 360 got that we never saw. And while it never saw big numbers because the regular gaming crowd over there didn't get on board with that console, the hardcore gamers did. So that, like I keep saying, also all that basically means is the people who had it fucking loved it. It's just that a lot of people didn't buy it in the first place. It's actually very, very fascinating. So to get a region-free Xbox 360 actually opens up a lot of doors, especially if you like, well, first of all, if you like date sims, yes, that's going to be helpful. But the thing that people mostly want to get imports of from Japan for the 360 there's a lot of shoot 'em up games that came out over there. A few of them we know over here, like that Moshi Moshi Pork and Pink Sweets release. I actually own that. It's like 2 games on the disc, and they're both really good shoot 'em up games. That one's region free, and people can import it, so people know about it. But there's actually a ton of them that are region locked that are really, really good that people don't bother with, like the Cave Shooters collection. A lot of those games are region locked, so you can't really use them. So if you have a region-free console that's modified, suddenly that door is open to you. And I never really considered it until recently. So yeah, maybe I'll do that myself at some point. We'll see. But yeah, basically all I'm just saying is I hate region coding, and I hate having to think about how to solve that problem. And I really wish that Microsoft would just drop those region locks and just let us all enjoy each other's games. That would just be fucking great. But it is the fortunate upside to this is it does seem like we're finally moving past that in the world, because all the current gen hardware is region free, with the exception of the Wii U. But the Wii U is essentially dead, so it doesn't necessarily count. So yeah, I guess that's it for that particular subject. Thank you, Kyle. Moving on, speaking of the Wii U, this is just a small story here that I thought was interesting. As I mentioned, the Wii U is essentially dead. It's got a couple more games coming out, like Just Dance 2018 will be coming out on that. Just Dance 2018 is also coming out on the original Wii, which is going to be kind of amazing. And there's a possibility of just a handful of other titles that may show up. But what's interesting is the Wii U, Nintendo dropped the Wii U essentially, I'm sure mentally they dropped it a long time ago, because the last time they had a firmware update for it was January of 2016. Now 2017, 2016 was the last time they did a firmware update for it. And because it was left alone for so long, modders basically came in and they figured out ways to hack the Wii U. They've decided to make it region free on their own, much like the 360, which I was just talking about, as well as to, allow it to play like pirated games and all this stuff. They even built like whole networks around it where you could connect to it and you could download full retail games to the console, all this stuff, because it had been left alone for that long. And Nintendo apparently just got wind of this whole thing, and they decided to do something about it. There is a new firmware update now out for the first time in a year and a half. Nintendo finally put out a firmware update. It adds no new features of any kind. The only thing it does is block the mod from being able to happen. It's too bad that Nintendo only cared about doing that. Like, either leave that alone because your console is done, or at least give us something useful with that mod. Like, the primary reason people started doing that modification is just to play imports. Yes, obviously piracy is going to be part of that, and I get why Nintendo's not going to give you that, but they could drop the region locks. That would be a nice parting gift from the Wii U, instead of this just fuck you update that they did for no real reason. How much money, honestly, how much money could they be losing on that, since the Wii U is not their platform anymore? I'm sure someone could argue that they are losing something, but how much did they spend in R&D to make that update work? I don't know. Couldn't have been a high priority for them, though, because again, they took a year and a half to do it. But I'm kind of all over the place on that particular position. But it is so weird that they would actually care enough to do that like a year and a half later when they're not doing anything else with that console. But hey, whatever. So if you have not updated your Wii U yet, and the idea of ever modding it is interesting to you, then don't update it. Yeah, that's about all I could say on that. So there, we'll move on. Now, not video game related. We have a couple of subjects here, one subject that's basically two parts. So obviously, I don't just talk about video games and stuff. I like to talk about other things. And one of the things I like to talk about a lot is movies. And what's coming up, we have Justice League and we have Thor Ragnarok. Now, both of those movies got trailers. Now, I've done whole videos on what's wrong with the DC cinematic universe, and at the same time, I praise a lot of the Marvel cinematic universe. And just because I dislike the direction that the DCU has gone, that does not mean, of course, I dislike DC or anything like that. I actually love it. Like, Superman is my favorite comic book character of all time, even though I think he's always done very, very poorly in film. You can give the Richard Donner Superman a pass because of the time it was made, but it doesn't particularly hold up as well as it probably could have. But that said, what are we thinking about these two movies? Like, are we excited, etc.? Justice League, I look at that movie and I think the same thing everyone else does, which is, you did this too quickly. Now, I'm beating a dead horse by just saying all the problems that are wrong with the DCU. Like, I've literally done, after Batman v Superman came out, I think I did it like the night I saw it. I did like a 2-hour or 3-hour live stream, kind of, I don't know, I would say basically going through the 5 stages of acceptance of how bad that movie was, and just kind of saying like how I would have done it differently and where I wanted the universe to go and all that stuff. Like, Batman vs Superman was so bad that the only movie what Justice League should have been, and it obviously isn't this, but what it should have been is a movie that just undoes all the events of that other movie. Like, it had to exist just to delete the other movie from continuity. Like an X-Men Days of Future Past type of movie where it comes in and just says like, hey, remember all those bad ones we did? This movie fixes all of them by getting rid of them. Like, that's what the movie needed to be. And I've said repeatedly how the DC universe could have worked really well. And all right, I'll give you a small story here. So even though Man of Steel was not the best movie, it was a good enough starting point. And that movie could have been like this big global event that got the entire universe going, because the existence of the Superman would have been the most significant event in all of human history. So the beginning of Batman v Superman actually was the only part of that movie that did it correctly. Now, the way that movie starts, you're seeing the events of Man of Steel, but you're seeing it from one other character's perspective. You're seeing it from Batman, aka Bruce Wayne's perspective, where he's on the ground, he's looking up, he's seeing all that shit going on, right? The big fight. And so it develops some sort of emotion and motivation in him. And what that should have been is like the way every one of these I would call them phase one Justice League movies would have started, would be every single character, what they were doing when the events of Man of Steel occurred. Because again, that would be the big rallying moment that started the entire universe. Then you would have had, in the case of Batman v Superman, you would call that a Batman movie by itself. It would have started off exactly the same way that the actual movie did, but then it would have been like, a year earlier, and you see like Batman's story building up to this particular time frame. Then we could see an Aquaman movie, and the Aquaman movie would start kind of the same way. Remember in Man of Steel, there was the big Zod, Kryptonian weapon that was in the Indian Ocean, like destroying the Indian Ocean. So it could start off with a scene of Aquaman, he's down there in Atlantis or whatever, and suddenly this big machine is like destroying Atlantis, and he's got to like save Atlantis from underground, and you see his perspective of Man of Steel, and then you go 1 year later or 10 years later earlier, and you can see his build up. So you get every character's origin story without questioning why Superman is or isn't involved, and yet you're doing universe building because we're understanding they're all in the same universe. You get my point? That's how that should have worked. That said, Wonder Woman had almost nothing to do with any of this, and it was probably the best one of all these films. But Justice League is the movie that is the remnants of their old plan. If you're not aware, their plan was to kick off a universe and just kind of jump really quickly. Rather than doing proper individual films, they wanted to get all the way to the Justice League because they thought, oh, that's an instant $1 billion because that's what Avengers did, with neglecting the fact that Avengers built up all their characters first. So in the case of Justice League, they wanted to do these 2 movies, and new ownership came in. So I don't remember who exactly. I think it was Comcast came in. I could be wrong about that, but they came in and they got involved in Warner Brothers, and they basically canceled the second Justice League movie. And the first one, they basically said, okay, we're too far along in production. We can't just not make it, and we can't delay it because it'll cost way too much money to do that. So they decided they're going to just go forward with production and kind of make changes on the fly. Zack Snyder was retained as director, but he was kind of like a puppet director, and Ben Affleck was their solution. They gave him executive power, meaning, not only is he playing Batman, but he's also getting to make creative choices on set. So if Zack Snyder has like some stupid idea, which is pretty much all he has, then Ben Affleck can be like, no, that idea makes absolutely no sense. We're not doing that. And he can override him. And they got far enough along that obviously Zack Snyder was not working because they replaced him with Joss Whedon at some point, I believe, for the reshoots of Justice League. So they probably let him film his Justice League with Ben Affleck kind of being in control of him a bit. And then they realized, okay, we still need more stuff. This part isn't working, whatever. We'll bring in Joss Whedon to fix those things. And that's the version of Justice League we're going to get, which is going to be kind of a weird, patched up Justice League with obviously a much different vision than it probably originally had. And then that's where we're going to be left off. And hopefully that'll right the ship. And we can all just kind of forget about how awful Batman v Superman was and how much damage it really did to a DC universe, or a potential DC universe, by wasting so many characters and so many storylines and doing them so quickly when it was completely undeserved. Sorry, as you can tell, I have a lot of problems with the DCU, and I said I wouldn't beat the dead horse, but I just did, didn't I? So let's move on. We'll talk about Thor Ragnarok. Now, that got a trailer as well. I guess I should say Justice League, the trailer, having watched it, I am still excited to see it. I want to see it, but I'm at best cautiously optimistic. I'm not like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm more like, I'll see it, and please don't let me down. Like, don't hit me again. That's kind of that's where I'm at with Justice League. Now moving on, Thor Ragnarok, on the other hand, that I'm legitimately excited about. Now, Thor, I have to be honest, his movies, with the exception of the Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, which people forget is actually part of the MCU, not the Ang Lee turd fuck one from 2003. That one's unwatchable. But the Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton from 2008, I think it is, or 2007. That one is not very good, but with the exception of that movie, I've always thought the Thor movies are like the weakest part of any Marvel phase. Thor 1 is not a good movie. It's a movie about a guy who's like, hey, look at me, I'm the best, and I'm an asshole. No, well, I'm going to banish you to Earth. Oh man, this sucks. Oh look, a hot lady. All right, I'm nice now, and the movie's over. Like it's not a good film. It's the least interesting one by far. It just had to exist to basically give Thor some character because you didn't want to do that to him in the Avengers. You can't introduce him there. Like his lore is interesting, but he's never been presented as on his own very well. Thor Ragnarok I liked a lot better, even though I know a lot of people are kind of the other way around. For similar reasons, at least that one had a more compelling story in my opinion. And he as a character was not very whiny and annoying. But that said, they are always some of the weaker films in that franchise. Thor Ragnarok, I'm sure they looked at it and went like, well, here's the deal. Thor, they probably recognized what I just said, which is that Thor has never had particularly interesting movies. And at the same time, there's a lot of demand to use the Hulk. But you can't, here's what a lot of people don't know, you can't really use the Hulk in his own films. And the reason for that is, I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the fact that Marvel characters, a lot of them are owned up, at least their movie rights are owned up by different studios. Spider-Man, for example, is with Sony, the X-Men are with Fox, Deadpool is with Fox, that kind of thing. Universal Studios has a claim to the Hulk, but a very unique claim. So Marvel has him, but they can use him in group films and in like other movies. They can throw him into other characters' movies, but they can't give him his own movie unless Universal does distribution for the movie, which would mean a substantial cut of a film. So if you actually go back and watch the Marvel Phase 1 films, you'll notice that The Incredible Hulk starts with a Universal Studios logo because they still own that much. Now, Universal Studios has expressed almost no interest in doing anything with the Hulk because they've done him twice, and both times they really got nothing out of it. So at the same time, Marvel probably looked at it and went like, we don't really want to cut a deal with them. We don't really need to cut a deal with them. And at the same time, we need something to spice up Thor. So they basically took two plot lines. They took like a whole Thor Ragnarok storyline and fused it with the Planet Hulk storyline. And you're kind of giving everybody what they want. And they're also explaining at the same time like what these two characters were doing when they weren't appearing in like Captain America Civil War and all that stuff. So I really like that. I think that's really cool. Again, universe building. I'm all for universe building, proper universe building. Take the hint, DCU. But yeah, so I'm excited about that one legitimately. I think that actually looks really cool. And that's a great way to make a Thor movie more interesting, is to throw the Hulk in there. So the trailers for that look really awesome, and I'm really looking forward to it. So there you go. Now, on the same subject, sort of, we're going to switch on to another one here, but it's in the same vein. Spider-Man, as I just mentioned, his rights are currently held over at Sony. And that's a whole long story we're not going to go into. But the long story short is Sony Pictures has the film rights to Spider-Man. And they have to put out a Spider-Man movie every 2 years to retain him, or they forego the rights to Marvel. Which is why when they ran into trouble after the Tobey Maguire franchise fell apart, they just rushed out that Amazing Spider-Man franchise, which people really didn't like. And then after that fell apart, they were finally willing to cut a deal. And so that's what we got, Spider-Man Homecoming. It's a movie that exists inside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though it's technically produced by Sony, even though Sony had nothing to do with the creative aspect of it. They were just in charge of the marketing side of it, which is why it had the worst trailers of any Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, but that's a whole different story. So there's a lot of buzz lately that Sony Pictures just posted an $86 or $87 million loss for the first quarter of 2017. So a lot of people are speculating that maybe Sony is going to finally come to the table and just sell Spider-Man outright to Disney, Disney being the parent company of Marvel. I am not of the philosophy that Sony is ready to do that yet, because the amount of money they would want for that would be like Star Wars money. Like they would want $3 or $4 billion to give Spider-Man up, because it's the only real valuable film franchise that Sony has. Whereas the current deal that they have with Marvel is actually quite profitable to them, because they just have to pay for the film and they make a bunch of money off of it while reinvigorating the brand. I don't see them being dumb enough to give that up. But at the same time, I do see them being dumb enough to fuck it up. There's a difference. Giving it up would be like a conscious decision to move the character. Fucking it up would be completely ruining the character by a course of their own incompetence. And I could easily see them doing that. So I don't think they're going to sell Spider-Man outright to Disney. because the amount of money they would want is not something Disney's going to be willing to pay, and Disney doesn't really need to buy it because they're not desperate for Spider-Man. But I could see Sony completely wrecking the character, and here's how. So Sony Pictures has been very openly talking about the fact that they want to make a Venom movie. They've been talking about that for a long time. Now, Venom is another Marvel character, of the rights of which is tied up over at Sony. Now, they're actually pushing forward on this Venom project. They're actually making this a movie. Sony Pictures is claiming that it's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while Marvel themselves is like, no, it's not. And there's a disconnect there. Because Marvel has nothing to do with it. Sony is essentially setting up its own Spider-Man cinematic universe using Venom, and eventually they will have Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man now. They'll have him in one of their own independent Spider-Man films that is not tied to the MCU. The logic is they might be building up a bunch of movies, building their own universe, and then putting Tom Holland in like the essentially Spider-Man Homecoming 3, which is not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in an effort to confuse the mass audiences into thinking their Spider-Man universe is the MCU. But knowing their track record of making films, Emoji Movie, Ghostbusters 2016, all that shit, knowing them, they're going to fuck this up, and they could really wreck Spider-Man again, in which we see a situation where they either wreck the character and wreck themselves so bad they have no choice but to sell Spider-Man to Disney, but for much less than they would currently want to, or they'll be smart enough, hopefully, to come to the table and make another deal. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we would much rather have Spider-Man back in Disney's hands, because clearly they know how to use him better. If you saw Spider-Man Homecoming, that should just be like the feeling you walked out of the theater with, which is, yeah, Sony shouldn't be allowed to make movies. This is proof of it. But I'm all for them if they cooperate the way they did this time around. Just let them pay the bills, let them do the marketing, even though their marketing work needs upgrades. Let them do that, and let Disney do all the the actual film and creative stuff. Then that's fine. That's all good, man. But I just don't want that. I don't want this fuckatry to happen where they kind of hijack the MCU, or they attempt to. That could suck. So, but we'll see. We'll see how that actually plays out. Hopefully the people over there are smart enough to recognize not to do that. But they are going forward with this Venom movie, so we'll see. So that's it for the, I guess, comic book movie news. So let's move on. We actually have a round of shout outs here. The following people are all Patreon backers. They are all at the level in which they get a shout out. Basically, I just kind of talk about you for a couple minutes, and it's usually just made up stuff. But really, thank you, all of you, for supporting the channel and supporting the podcast. I really appreciate it. You, at any time, if you're listening, you can upgrade. If you can add, first of all, you can go to Patreon. You can become a backer. You can get early access to this, or you can get early access to any video on my channel. I always post them there early, as well as, if you, depending on your tier, you can get shout outs on the podcast. You can pick subjects on the podcast. You can even be on this podcast if you want to, but in this case, these people just are here for shout outs. So the first one up is Robert Yusuf. Robert Yusuf is a ninja. He's been a ninja for years. He went to ninja school. I didn't know that was a thing, but it's actually a real school. Like, they have 9 to 5 classes. It's 9 to 5. It's not normal school hours. It's like work hours. So it gets kind of annoying with, if you also have a job, because then you have to get a job where you work the night shift, which is kind of weird, because then you have to use your night shift skills. Like, when you're at night shift, you have to use your ninja skills, and sometimes you like accidentally kill somebody. It's weird, but that's what Robert Yusuf was telling me. He said it gets confusing, but now, he's actually a ninja. So congratulations, Robert, on graduating from ninja school. You are a hero. Rob Janos, or Janos, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. I apologize. He actually just joined. This is the first time he has ever appeared on the FigureItOutcast, and I want to welcome him. Thank you for being a new backer here. You are also, you're not a ninja, but you are a warrior, like a badass fucking warrior. Like, you ever see the cover of Altered Beast? Like, that's what Rob actually looks like in real life, but he hides it under like a Speedo, like in a Speedo, like those, like a wife beater Speedo, like the brand Speedo, not the underwear Speedo. They're also a brand, guys. Come on, get your head out of the gutter. But he actually wears like one of those wife beater things, and he thinks it hides like his body, which I don't know, he's hiding it. Like, dude, if I looked like that, I wouldn't be hiding that shit. But he hides it because he's like modest and humble. That's how Rob rocks. But good for him. So congratulations, Rob, on being able to beat the fuck out of anybody if you really wanted to. That's awesome. And thank you again for supporting the podcast. And Trey Wagner, who of course is a good buddy of mine. Trey Wagner actually also lives in Chicago. I've hung out with him multiple times. Really nice guy. We'll get together sometimes and he'll actually buy me lunch. I'm not making this one up. This actually is true. Like, he and I hang out from time to time. He's a hell of a nice guy. So thank you, Trey, for everything you do. You are awesome. And thank you for also supporting Game Society, my other YouTube channel. I appreciate that as well. You guys are all awesome. So thank you, Robert. Wow, we had 2 Robs. I didn't even recognize that. Rob, and Trey. Thank you, guys. So the next story up here, this is kind of a weird story because it's 2 stories. Every once in a while, someone will find some video game oddity, some treasure they recover from somewhere, and it makes its way to the internet, and everybody's like, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. We had 2 of them in the same month, which was very, very strange. Now, the first one up, a lot of people sent me pictures of this and like the link to this. Basically, a guy in Chile found what's called a Sega Fish Life console. Now, what it apparently is, you can look this up for yourself. It's currently on eBay. The guy's asking like $25,000 for it. Basically, it's a Dreamcast inside of a completely different shell. And it was only utilized in like hotels and other places like that. Just places that wanted to simulate having an aquarium. Hotels, restaurants, maybe a dentist's office, that kind of thing. What they would do instead of having an aquarium is they would have this console set up running some pre-existing software on a television screen, so it just looked like a digital aquarium. And it could show a different display of different types of fish and all this weird shit. And it seems to us like completely useless, but we're obviously not the market for that. But technically what this thing is a Sega Dreamcast. And it actually runs Dreamcast games. It can actually do other things, which is very odd. So it's like the most unique piece of Dreamcast hardware out there, which is, of course, as someone who's a super fan of the Dreamcast, I would love to own this, but obviously I won't be doing that. I'm not spending $25,000 on a console. That's insane. But I think it's neat that something like that can be just randomly discovered. So yeah, if you want to take a look at it, look it up. It actually kind of looks like the prototype images of the old Dreamcast DVD player that never came into existence, but there were prototype photos of it. It looks exactly the same, just like a big silver box. But yeah, I just think that's really cool. And at the same time, shortly after that, there was a guy in California, I believe it was somewhere around San Francisco. I want to say Oceanside, which I think is around San Francisco. He was in like a Goodwill or something like that, and he was looking around and he saw this like weird looking, what he described as an Atari console, or thought of as an Atari console, and he was right, it was, but it looked weird. And long story short, he found the Atari 2700 prototype. Not 2600. Atari 2600 is like the popular console that we all know. But at one point, Atari was working on an upgraded version called the Atari 2700. And it looked different. And instead of having regular controllers, it had wireless controllers. It was never released, although it was advertised. And it was in prototype phase. There were a few units built. This dude found one at a Goodwill for $30. He took a bunch of photos of it. And he actually put it up on eBay. I think he ended up selling it for like $3,000, something like that. It's not known how many of these exist, but people think maybe like up to 15 of them exist. To just find something like that is fucking amazing. Like, the closest I've ever found to something like that is I found a Final Fantasy Crystal White GameCube in Japan. Only 150 of those were ever made. I got mine for $30. Not even, it was like $26, $27. It's worth like $1,000 used, which is amazing. But this guy obviously has me beat by finding a prototype thing. So yeah, you can also look that thing up if you want to see what it looks like. I'll put an image in the podcast here, but it's, at least if you're watching this on YouTube. But that's pretty amazing. Now in his case, it didn't come with the controllers. He just had the console and I guess a power supply. But the cool thing about it is Atari designed it so it could actually use the wired controllers. Doing a little research on it, the only real reason that anybody can discern as to why this was never released is that the wireless controllers were too likely to cause interference with other devices and with other Atari products, meaning they had too long of a range. So if you were playing with them, you might start interfering with other game consoles. and I guess it just wasn't a very reliable, which is not really surprising. I would be amazed you could think in like 1981 or whatever it was that you could have a successfully functional wireless game console, but hey, apparently they kind of did it. So yeah, it's really cool to whoever ended up owning this thing. Congratulations on having something that rare. That's really very nice. And I think it's just funny, man, that we ran into two of these like weird ass prototypes. Not even one wasn't even a prototype, it's just a very unique oddball item. But for the fact that both of these things existed and somebody got them, that's pretty cool. Moving on, got another subject here I wanted to talk about. So there was a big hullabaloo about the fact that GameStop is they just announced that they are getting rid of. They have apparently had a policy in which they were no longer going to work on Thanksgiving Day here in the United States. The argument being, of course, it's a day everybody wants to be with their family and friends and all that stuff, and you shouldn't have to work that day. And that's how they've been doing it for the past few years. And then this year they decided, you know what, we're going to have employees work on Thanksgiving. Now, the reason that's kind of brutal is, of course, Black Friday is the next day, and that's like the worst day of shopping in the U.S. So the idea was give them a break the day before because they're going to need it. But this year, yeah, they're making their employees work on Thanksgiving, which is awful, first of all. But second of all, it doesn't speak well about their actions that they're going to do something their employees so clearly don't want. GameStop, I mean, I'm very much on the record. I hate GameStop. I've said it multiple times. I think their store sucks. I think their policies suck. Their prices are terrible in general. Like, I've never come out of a GameStop and not regretted that experience. They get hacked all the time. I can't tell you how often I'm told by GameStop, hey, change your password on your account because we just got hacked again. And it's like, God, like they suck, man. They really, really suck. I have so many horror stories of ever trying to buy shit there. And at least the US version. Like, I've been to GameStops in Ireland, and I've been to GameStops in Austria. They're much better over there, but for whatever reason in the US, they're just pure shit. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about their future and how I don't really think they have much of one. I think that GameStop recognizes that we're heading for an all-digital future. Something despite my love of physical media, I'm not unaware of this. I'm completely aware that we are going for an all-digital future. And you would think I would like GameStop on the basis of their support for physical media, but they are abusers of it, and I don't respect their policies, and I don't like the way they do it. So I can't support them, and I never do unless I absolutely fucking have to for one reason or another, and that's very rare. But yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I think GameStop recognizes that the digital future is coming and they don't really have a place in that world, much like Blockbuster didn't really have a place in the Netflix world and stuff like that. So I think GameStop is currently doing a lot of cannibalistic short-term business practices. This is an example of one of those. By working on Thanksgiving Day, it gives them a short-term advantage that, hey, we're going to be that store that's open on Thanksgiving, so if you need something, you can get it on Thanksgiving, only at GameStop, blah, blah, blah. Like, that sounds good to their shareholders for the day, but what it does is it burns out their employee base, and it also makes them just look like assholes to the public, and they don't really win out of that. And I think that they're just trying to find any sort of way they can to keep their system afloat, their whole business model. And that's, I don't see it lasting for them for much longer. And they're trying to, tinker with other things. Like, they're trying to get into publishing. So there's every once in a while, there's a game that'll be exclusively released there because it's published by them. Like Into the Deep, I think, was one of them. And I think like the physical PS4 version of Killing Floor 2, stuff like that is only released, at least in the States, only at GameStop. And I think that's one of the ways they're tinkering with it. But I don't see this working out for them in the long run. I know that's why they got back into retro gaming, because they were like, hey, retro gaming, we don't have to pay anybody, and there's no DRM or any of that shit. If we kind of embrace the retro gaming community, we might have a new business model here. But I don't think that's really working out for them either, because everybody, I do a lot of retro game hunting. I would never go to GameStop for that. And everybody I know who does retro gaming typically has complaints about the way GameStop does it, because they're very bad at testing those things, making sure the games are clean, all that kind of stuff. And of course they sell a lot of them online, just with generic stock pictures, and you don't know what version of that you're ever going to get. So they're not really the best place for that by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that there's a lot of trouble coming their way, and I would be surprised if they're still in business in a few years, to be honest with you. So I don't know. We'll see. But that's my prediction right now, is I think GameStop's only got a couple of years left. So we're now at the time we're going to do our last subject. This subject is brought to us by another Patreon backer. This is Corey Marsh. Same with Kyle Vaughn. He also gets the, he's at the level every month where he gets to pick a subject, and then I go ahead and talk about it. So when I asked him what he wanted, he actually had kind of a more of a philosophical question or subject rather than like a literal one. And what he basically said was like, man, when I was a kid, I would get a video game and I would play the shit out of it. I'd play it for like, 10, 12 hours and I'd beat it all the way through. Like that was my day. Like that's what I was going to do, is get all the way through it. Now I'm older and I'm lucky if I can play it for a couple of hours, and I never finish games anymore. And he was just curious, like, does that happen to you? Is that what it is for you? And unfortunately, yeah, that's exactly what it's like. I remember, man, like being a kid, there's so many games where like, I know I kind of mentioned Blockbuster then, I'm gonna get like super nostalgic, but I remember Make It a Blockbuster Night. Like that was a good warm feeling you got at a certain age range. You'd go, you'd rent a game, and you're like, this is my weekend, this is what I have, I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna beat the entirety of this game, because you didn't have work, you just had like school, and if it was a weekend, you probably had the weekend off, and you get together with your buddies and you guys would just fucking play this game the whole weekend. You'd crush it, you get all the way through it, and that would be all the stuff you would do. And even when you had to play by yourself or whatever, you'd sit there, you'd just devote a lot more time to it because your responsibilities were much more limited, which you didn't think so, of course, as a child. At the time, you're like, oh, I have to go to school and I have to do my homework. Like, that's going to take so much time. You have no idea, of course, until you're an adult. That's nothing. You have so much more work ahead of you. As an adult, I never have time to do that. Like, if there's a game I'm really excited about, I'm lucky if I get to play it for a few hours, and then I have to go deal with real life. I never get to do that anymore. And if I want to beat a game, I do not have the time to do it the way I used to, where it's, I'm going to beat this all the way through. It's more like I can do the cliff notes. I can get through the main story and then I kind of move on, never get to do anything else, that kind of thing. And I'm sure a lot of you run into that problem. And I'm sure a lot of you who are younger don't know this yet, but you will run into that. And it sucks, man. It really sucks. Large part of my job is playing video games, and that's the irony of it, is that I only get to do it in short bursts. Like I don't get to play video games for extensive amounts of time. I often have to play video games for the purposes of capture, which is very different. It's kind of like watching a movie in school. It's like, yeah, you're watching a movie, but you're also taking notes and you're having to like write a report on it. Like I do the same kind of thing with video games. Like I have to play it a specific way for a specific purpose to get a specific video made out of it, that kind of thing. It's not something where you can just there's no pressure, you sit back, you just relax and have fun. It's very, very different. And then once you're done with the capture part, you have to stop playing at that point. You have to now make stuff. You have to go work. It's very different. And that's from the perspective of someone whose job involves video games. Someone like Corey, whose job doesn't involve video games, he just can kind of do it when he has time. He's saying the same thing. He only gets to play it for a few hours, and it's like, fuck, I'm out of time. I can't do this. I got to do other things. So, that's unfortunately, it's just kind of the truth. I mean, it's not. There's no solution to this problem except for like quitting your job and everything, which is not really a solution. I've always kind of thought it'd be nice to believe anyway that when I'm older in my retirement, I'll finally be able to, no responsibilities. I'll be able to just sit down, play video games, and just kind of relax, and that'll be how I go into my twilight. But who knows if I'm ever going to enjoy that kind of luxury. So that would be fun though. But thank you for that subject, Corey. And thank you, of course, to Kyle for his, as well as the Patreon backers, Robert, Rob, and Trey, and everyone else who supports the podcast. And, of course, you for just listening to it, even if you're listening to the public version of this. I appreciate that as well. So thank you to all of you. And, have a good one, guys.